There is something strangely comforting about a scary story told in the quiet of night, especially when the rain is falling gently outside your window. The sound of raindrops against the roof and the distant rumble of thunder creates the perfect setting, a safe cocoon where you can let your imagination wander. Within that cocoon, shadows seem to stretch, whispers echo in the corners, and the unknown knocks softly at the edge of your thoughts. In this collection, you will hear 21 eerie tales, each one wrapped in a calm, soothing rhythm that allows you to drift deeper into sleep even as the stories send a shiver down your spine. These are not tales designed to shock, but to immerse you, to carry you into a dreamlike state where the strange and the unsettling mix with the steady lull of falling rain. You may hear of abandoned houses where footsteps echo with no one there, of forests where the trees seem to breathe, of flickering lights that never quite go out, and voices that fade in and out like the wind. Yet all of it is gentle, never rushing, never loud. So close your eyes, let the stormy night surround you, and prepare to drift into a world where fear is soft, shadows are calm, and even the scariest stories can guide you into sleep. Cloud with Rain Ghost Sparkles. The house at the end of the lane. At the far edge of a quiet village, there stood a house no one entered. Its shutters hung loose, its roof sagged beneath years of storms, and its windows reflected nothing at all. Children whispered about it when they passed, but none dared go inside. One autumn evening, a traveler found himself caught in the rain. The streets were empty, the lanterns dim, and the only shelter he could see was that very house at the end of the lane. With nowhere else to go, he pushed open the door. The air inside was colder than the storm outside. Dust floated like mist, and the floor creaked beneath every step. The traveler lit a small candle, its flame trembling as though it feared the dark itself. In the silence, he heard something faint, a slow, steady sound. It was not the rain. It was not the wind. It was the sound of breathing. The traveler froze, candle held tight. The house, it seemed, was not empty at all. And as the rain poured harder against the broken windows, the sound of that hidden breath moved closer and closer. Cloud with Rain Ghost. The woman in the mirror, extended. The attic room was small, barely large enough to hold a narrow bed, a desk, and an old wardrobe. But what caught the new tenant's attention most was the tall standing mirror in the corner. Its frame was carved with twisting vines, faded with age, and its glass had a faint crack that ran like a vein near the edge. The landlord had mentioned it offhandedly, "Been here longer than I have. Best not to move it." At first, the mirror seemed harmless. During the day, it reflected the little sunlight that managed to slip through the curtains. At night, it caught the dim glow of the bedside lamp. But soon, the tenant, a young artist who had come here seeking inspiration, began to notice peculiar things. Her reflection sometimes blinked slower than she did. When she turned her head, the reflection lagged behind, moving just a heartbeat later. It was subtle, easy to dismiss as sleeplessness or the trick of tired eyes. Still, she began covering the mirror at night, throwing a sheet across it so she wouldn't have to glance at it before sleeping. But on one stormy evening, as rain pattered against the glass panes and thunder rolled across the sky, she woke to a strange sound. It wasn't the storm. It was soft, steady breathing, coming from the corner of the room. The sheet had slipped from the mirror. Her reflection stood there, but she was still lying in bed. The mirrored version of her was upright, its lips curved in a smile that she had not made. Its eyes glowed faintly, as though lit from within. Frozen, she watched as the reflection raised its hand and pressed it against the inside of the mirror. The glass rippled, like water disturbed by a stone. A faint tapping followed, 1, 2, 3 taps, matching the rhythm of the rain outside. She pulled the blanket to her chin, whispering to herself that it was only a dream. But the reflection leaned closer, pressing harder, its smile widening unnaturally. The rain grew heavier. The glass trembled. And then she realized. The reflection wasn't trying to mimic her anymore. It was trying to get out. Cloud with rain ghost. The footsteps in the attic. There was nothing remarkable about the cottage. Warm walls, creaking floors, and a roof that had kept out storms for decades. But the attic was different. No one ever used it, not since the day the owners locked the door and left it untouched. Still, on rainy nights, when the wind howled and the trees bent low, footsteps could be heard pacing above. Slow, steady, deliberate. The family told themselves it was the wood shifting, or perhaps the rain running across the roof. But one night, a boy staying there grew curious. Unable to sleep, he lit a lantern and crept up the stairs. The attic door, though locked, stood slightly ajar. He pushed it open. The air smelled of dust and damp wood. His lantern lit up old trunks, broken furniture, and cobwebs hanging low. Nothing moved. Nothing stirred. Then, as he stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind him. The sound of footsteps returned, circling him in the darkness. But this time, they were not above him. They were on the attic floor. And they were not his. Cloud with rain ghost. The library that never slept. On the corner of a forgotten street stood an ancient library. Its stone walls were cracked, its doors warped with age, and the sign above the entrance had long since lost its letters. Few people remembered it was there at all. But when the rain fell heavy and the night grew quiet, the library lit up from within, as though welcoming someone unseen. One stormy evening, a young student found herself lost after missing the last train home. The streets were empty, puddles reflecting the dim street lamps. When she saw the faint glow spilling from the cracked doors of the library, she felt strangely relieved. A place to wait out the rain, she thought. A safe place. Inside, the air was cold and smelled faintly of dust and ink. Tall shelves stretched into the shadows, lined with books so old their spines had turned gray. She called out, "Hello," but no one answered. The rain against the tall windows sounded louder here, almost like whispers. As she wandered deeper, she noticed something odd. The books were not silent. When she passed them, faint voices drifted out from their pages. Some whispered, some murmured, and some laughed faintly, though no one was reading them. Curious, she pulled a heavy book from the shelf. Its cover was blank, its pages yellowed. When she opened it, the words began to write themselves in front of her eyes. "You should not be here." Startled, she dropped the book. The sound echoed far too loudly, as if the shelves themselves were listening. The whispers grew sharper, louder, surrounding her. She tried to leave, but the rows of shelves seemed to twist, the aisles longer than before, the exit further away. Her footsteps quickened, but with every turn, the library grew stranger. A staircase appeared where none had been, leading downward into darkness. Lanterns glowed on their own, one after another, beckoning her deeper. And then, in the silence between the rain, she heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the unseen basement below. She whispered to herself, "It's just the storm, just the storm." But deep down, she knew. The library was never empty. And tonight, she was not alone. Cloud with Rain Book's ghost. The room with the locked door. Every old house has one, a room no one uses, a door no one opens. In this particular house, the locked room was on the second floor, tucked between two bedrooms. The wallpaper around it had peeled away with age, and the brass handle was tarnished black. The family who lived there had grown used to ignoring it. The father always said, "It's just storage," though none of them had ever seen what was inside. The key had been lost long ago. Or perhaps it had been hidden. On quiet nights, when the rain poured heavily and the house creaked against the wind, the children sometimes heard noises from behind the door. Soft thuds. Scraping, like furniture being dragged across the floor. Once, the youngest swore he heard a voice, low and muffled, calling his name. One evening, curiosity got the better of the eldest child. He stayed awake while the rest of the house slept, clutching a candle as the storm rattled the windows. He crept to the locked door and pressed his ear against it. At first, he heard nothing but the rain. Then came the sound, slow, steady breathing, just on the other side. His heart pounded. The breathing stopped. Then, without warning, something scraped against the wood from the inside, right where his ear was pressed. He stumbled back, nearly dropping the candle. The doorknob rattled, twisting violently, though no one was in the hall but him. And then, silence. Shaking, he backed away, step by step, never turning his eyes from that door. Just as he reached the staircase, he heard it, 3 sharp knocks from the other side, perfectly in rhythm with the thunder outside. The room had been locked for decades. Yet something inside still wanted out. Cloud with rain door ghost. The man at the window. Rain fell in heavy sheets that night, blurring the world outside into streaks of gray. A woman sat alone in her living room, the fire crackling low, her blanket pulled tightly around her shoulders. She had always loved storms, until that evening. Her cottage was surrounded by woods. In the daytime, they were peaceful, filled with birdsong. But at night, they became a wall of shadows, hiding whatever might stand between the trees. The large window by her armchair looked directly out into them. At first, she saw nothing but the rain. Then, just for a second, a face. It was pressed against the glass. Pale. Expressionless. Watching her. Her heart leapt, and she blinked quickly, trying to convince herself it was only her imagination. But when she leaned forward, the man was still there. He stood perfectly still in the storm, water dripping down his skin, yet his clothes didn't move with the wind. His eyes never blinked. Panicked, she rushed to the door, fumbling with the lock to ensure it was sealed. She pulled the curtains shut, though her hands trembled so badly that the fabric snagged on the rod. For a while, she sat in silence, listening to the storm. Slowly, her heartbeat calmed. Maybe it had been a trick of the rain. Then came the sound. A faint tapping. On the glass. 3 knocks. Deliberate. Patient. She dared to part the curtain just an inch. The window pane was bare. Nothing stood outside. Relieved, she laughed nervously and turned back toward the fire. That was when she froze. From across the room, in the reflection of the darkened glass, she saw him again. But this time, he wasn't outside. He was standing just behind her chair. Cloud with rain bust in silhouette ghost. The whispers in the tunnel. There was a small railway tunnel on the edge of town, built long before electricity or cars filled the streets. Its bricks were damp, moss grew between the cracks, and rainwater trickled constantly from the ceiling. Locals avoided it, not just because it was crumbling, but because of what people said they heard inside. When the storm came, a traveler decided to take shelter there. He had been walking for hours, his shoes soaked through, his lantern flickering. The tunnel seemed perfect, dry, quiet, and hidden from the wind. He leaned against the wall, trying to catch his breath. That was when he heard it. A voice. faint, carried on the drip of water. "Come closer." He straightened, his lantern trembling in his hand. The tunnel stretched endlessly in both directions, shadows swallowing the brick. No one was there. He told himself it was the wind rushing through the passage, nothing more. But then it came again, louder this time, clearer. "Come closer, we've been waiting." His chest tightened. He forced himself to walk forward, the lantern's glow bouncing weakly against the walls. With every step, the whispers multiplied, dozens of them now, overlapping, echoing. Some were soft and pleading. Others hissed with anger. Water dripped faster. The tunnel seemed to stretch further with each step, as though it had no end at all. And then, his lantern flickered out. The whispers stopped. Silence fell so heavy it pressed against his ears. He held his breath, frozen in the dark. Then, behind him, so close he could feel the breath at his neck, a voice whispered, "You shouldn't have come." The sound of footsteps followed, but they weren't his. Cloud with rain, locomotive ghost. The house at the end of the road. At the far edge of town, past the fields where no one walked at night, stood a house everyone avoided. Its roof sagged, its windows were broken, and ivy climbed so thickly across the walls that it looked as though nature itself wanted to swallow it whole. Children whispered stories about it, about lights that flickered in the upper windows, even though the house had no electricity. One rainy evening, a young man on his way home from work saw the storm growing too strong. The wind bent the trees sideways, and the rain felt like needles against his skin. Desperate for shelter, he spotted the house at the end of the road. He hesitated, he knew the stories, but the storm left him no choice. Inside, the air was damp and cold. Water dripped from the ceiling into cracked buckets. The floor creaked beneath his every step. He lit a small lantern he carried, and its glow revealed peeling wallpaper patterned with faded roses. For a moment, he almost laughed. It was just a house, nothing more. Then he noticed the stairs. Though the rest of the house looked broken and rotten, the staircase seemed oddly well kept. The wood was polished, as though someone had walked it recently. His lantern light fell on wet footprints, bare, human, leading upward. His chest tightened, but some pull urged him to follow. With each step, the floor groaned louder, the wind outside shrieked harder, and the rain hammered the windows. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched into shadows, with doors on either side. He heard it then, a faint lullaby, sung by a voice that was neither young nor old. It came from the last door at the end of the hall. He pushed it open slowly, the hinges shrieking. Inside was a child's bedroom. Toys scattered on the floor, a rocking chair swaying on its own. And on the bed sat a figure, small, still, with its back turned. The lullaby continued, low and haunting. The man whispered, "Hello?" His voice cracked. The figure stopped singing. Slowly, it began to turn its head, not the body, just the head, twisting far too far to be human. Its pale face smiled at him with wide, unblinking eyes. The rocking chair stopped. The room fell silent except for the storm outside. And then, from behind him, another voice whispered, "You weren't supposed to find us, cloud with rain derelict house ghost." The phone that rang at midnight. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. The city streets were flooded, and people stayed indoors, waiting for the storm to pass. In a small apartment on the 7th floor of an old building, a woman sat reading by the dim light of a lamp. The sound of the storm was comforting, until the phone rang. It was an old rotary phone, dusty and unused. She had kept it more as decoration than anything else, since she always used her mobile. At midnight, when the shrill ring cut through the silence, her heart skipped a beat. She hesitated before answering. "Hello?" Static. Then, faintly, a whisper, "Can you hear me?" Her hand trembled. The voice was soft, childlike, but broken by the hiss of static. "Who is this?" she asked. No reply. Just breathing. Slow, steady. Then the line went dead. Uneasy, she placed the receiver back and tried to convince herself it was just interference from the storm. But a few minutes later, the phone rang again. This time, when she answered, the whisper was clearer. "Why did you move my things?" Her blood ran cold. She looked around the apartment. She lived alone. She had never touched anything that didn't belong to her. "Who is this?" she demanded, her voice shaking. The line crackled. Then came the sound of footsteps. Not over the phone, behind her. Inside her own apartment. She turned slowly, clutching the receiver to her ear. The hallway was dark, but at the end of it, she saw a figure. Small, pale, dripping as though soaked by the rain outside. The voice whispered once more, this time from both the phone and the hall, "I'm already inside." The line went dead. But the footsteps in the hall kept coming. Cloud with rain telephone receiver ghost. The shadow in the stairwell. The apartment building was old, its walls cracked, its pipes groaning whenever it rained. Most residents used the elevator, though it rattled and creaked as if ready to fall. Few ever used the stairwell, except when the power went out. On a stormy night, when lightning flashed and the rain slammed against the windows, the lights in the building flickered and died. A young man, carrying groceries, sighed and pushed open the stairwell door. The heavy air smelled of damp concrete. His footsteps echoed as he began to climb. Halfway up, he noticed something strange. His own shadow, cast faintly by the lightning through the stairwell's narrow window, didn't move quite right. When he stepped forward, it hesitated. When he paused, it swayed ever so slightly, as though breathing. He told himself it was the storm, the flicker of light confusing his eyes. But as he climbed, the shadow began to lengthen, stretching unnaturally far along the wall, even around corners where the light should not have reached. At the next landing, he froze. His shadow was no longer attached to him. It stood at the top of the stairs, waiting. The thunder roared, the building shook, and for a moment, the stairwell went pitch black. When the next flash of lightning came, the shadow was closer, much closer, its shape taller, darker, distorted. Heart racing, he dropped his groceries and bolted up the steps, 2 at a time. The sound of his breath filled the stairwell, but beneath it, he heard something else. Footsteps. Heavy ones. Following. He reached his floor, flung open the door, and slammed it behind him. The hallway was empty. His apartment was only a few steps away. Safe. But as he reached for his keys, he glanced back through the small window in the stairwell door. His shadow was still there. Smiling. Cloud with rain, black, large square ghost. The knock on the basement door. Every stormy night, the old house groaned as though it remembered every year it had stood. The family who lived there were used to the sounds, creaking floors, rattling windows, wind slipping through the cracks. But one sound was not so easy to explain. The knock. It always came from the basement door. At first, they thought it was an animal, maybe a stray trapped beneath the floorboards. But the knock was too deliberate, 3 sharp raps, always at midnight, always when the rain was falling hardest. One night, curiosity overcame fear. The father decided to wait by the door with a lantern in hand. Midnight arrived, and as thunder rolled across the sky, the sound came again, 3 knocks. He opened the door swiftly, expecting to catch the culprit. The basement was empty. Dust lay thick on the steps, undisturbed. But as he turned to go back upstairs, he noticed something that made his skin crawl. The door, on the inside, was scratched, long, deep grooves in the wood, as though something had been trying to claw its way out. From that night on, the knocks grew louder. Sometimes there were more than 3. Sometimes they were frantic, desperate, pounding. The family tried to ignore it, locking the door, even nailing it shut. But the sound always came back. Then, one stormy night, the knocks didn't stop. They became violent, shaking the entire frame. The nails bent outward, the wood splintered. The family huddled together in the living room, clutching each other, listening as the door downstairs gave way. Silence followed. And then, Slow footsteps began climbing the basement stairs. Cloud with rain door ghost. The portrait in the hallway. The storm had knocked out the power, leaving the house in near darkness. Only the faint glow of candles lit the long hallway, their flames bending with every draft. Along the walls hung old portraits, ancestors whose names had long been forgotten, their eyes forever watching. The new owner of the house, a woman who had recently moved in, never liked walking past them at night. The faces seemed too alive, their gazes following her no matter where she stood. She often covered them with cloth, but that evening, with the storm raging and the wind rattling the shutters, she hadn't bothered. As she carried her candle toward the bedroom, she froze. One of the portraits had changed. The woman in the painting was supposed to be sitting with folded hands, expression calm. But now, her head was tilted, her mouth curved into the faintest smile. The candle shook in the woman's hand. She blinked, telling herself it was her imagination, a trick of the shadows. But when she looked again, the smile was wider. Her heart hammered as she backed away. The painted woman's eyes glinted unnaturally, as though reflecting the candlelight. Then, slowly, impossibly, the head in the portrait turned, following her down the hall. The candle sputtered. The wind outside roared. And in that instant of near darkness, she heard it, a soft laugh, echoing from the walls. She dropped the candle and ran for her room, slamming the door shut. For a moment, silence. She pressed her ear against the door, breath ragged. Then, faintly, from the other side, came the sound of fingernails dragging across wood, followed by the whisper of a woman's voice, "Don't cover me again, cloud with rain framed picture ghost." The elevator that didn't stop. The office building was nearly empty that night. Only the security guard and one employee remained as the storm lashed against the tall glass windows. The worker, tired and eager to get home, pressed the button for the ground floor. The elevator doors slid open with a groan, and he stepped inside. The ride began normally. The faint buzz of the old light above, the hum of machinery, the soft vibration beneath his feet. But then, instead of stopping at the ground floor, the elevator kept going. He frowned. There were only 10 floors in the building, yet the numbers on the panel continued: 11, 12, 13. His stomach sank. He pressed the emergency button. Nothing happened. He pressed ground again and again, but the elevator didn't slow. The lights flickered, and a deep, metallic groan echoed around him. Finally, the elevator shuddered to a stop. The doors slid open. A long, dark hallway stretched out before him. The walls were concrete, damp with water stains. Bare bulbs flickered overhead, buzzing faintly. This floor didn't exist. Not in this building. Not anywhere. Against his better judgment, he stepped out. His footsteps echoed far too loudly, as though the hallway itself were empty and endless. Doors lined the walls, but each was sealed shut, their handles rusted and unmoving. Then he heard it. A whisper. From behind one of the doors. Followed by another. And another. Dozens of voices, low and urgent, overlapping until they became an incomprehensible chorus. Panicked, he turned back to the elevator, only to see the doors closing. He lunged forward, but it was too late. The elevator began to descend, leaving him in the endless hallway. The whispers grew louder, now joined by the sound of footsteps approaching from the shadows. And somewhere down the hall, one door creaked open. Cloud with rain, whole ghost. The lantern in the woods. The storm was relentless that night, pushing trees sideways and flooding the dirt paths that wound through the woods. A traveler, soaked to the bone, pulled his cloak tighter and searched desperately for shelter. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the forest in brief, startling glimpses. That was when he saw it. A lantern, glowing faintly in the distance. It swung slowly back and forth, as though carried by an unseen hand. Relieved, he hurried toward it, calling out, "Hello? Is someone there?" The rain swallowed his words, but the lantern remained, glowing steadily, always just a few steps ahead. He quickened his pace, heart pounding with hope and unease. The trees thickened, the mud pulled at his boots, yet the lantern never seemed closer. Each time lightning split the sky, he saw it hanging there, sometimes high, sometimes low, always leading him deeper into the woods. Finally, breathless and shivering, he reached a small clearing. The lantern hung from the branch of a dead tree, swaying in the storm. No one stood nearby. As he stepped forward, the flame flickered out. Darkness swallowed the clearing. Then, from behind him, he heard the crunch of footsteps in the wet leaves. Slow. Deliberate. Coming closer. He turned quickly, but the forest was empty. Lightning flashed once more, and in that split-second glow, he saw dozens of figures standing just beyond the tree line. Pale, still, watching. When the sky went dark again, only their whispers remained. And the lantern, without anyone touching it, lit itself once more. Cloud with rain, red paper lantern ghost. The child on the road. The rain poured in heavy sheets, blurring the windshield as a man drove home late at night. The wipers screeched back and forth, struggling to keep up. The road ahead was nearly invisible, lit only by his headlights cutting through the storm. Then he saw it. A small figure, standing in the middle of the road. He slammed on the brakes, tires skidding in the water. The car jolted to a stop just inches away. Heart racing, he leaned forward. The figure was a child, barefoot, soaked, their clothes clinging to pale skin. They didn't move, didn't flinch. Rolling down the window, he called out, "Are you all right? Do you need help?" The child slowly raised their head. Their eyes glowed faintly in the beam of the headlights, empty and unblinking. Chilled to the bone, he stepped out of the car, clutching his jacket tightly against the storm. "Where are your parents?" he asked. The child said nothing. They simply turned and began walking toward the woods. He followed, each step sinking into the mud. The rain drowned out every sound except the steady crunch of his boots and the faint splash of the child's bare feet. The trees swallowed them both. His flashlight beam darted between trunks, desperate not to lose sight. But after a few minutes, the child was gone. He spun in circles, heart pounding. That was when he saw them. Dozens of children, pale and soaked, standing between the trees. All staring at him with hollow eyes. The storm raged on, but their voices were clear, overlapping in a whisper that froze his blood, "Stay with us." When he ran back to the road, gasping for breath, his car was gone. Only the rain remained. Cloud with rain, children crossing ghost. The bed that moved. The storm shook the old farmhouse as if trying to tear it apart. Rain lashed the windows, and the wind howled through the cracks. A boy lay awake in his upstairs bedroom, clutching his blanket tightly. He had never liked storms. But what kept him from sleeping wasn't the thunder. It was the feeling that his bed was moving. At first, it was slight, a gentle shift, as though the floorboards beneath him swayed. He told himself it was the storm, the wind rattling the frame. But then the bed slid. Slowly. Away from the wall. His breath caught. He pressed himself flat, pretending to sleep. The bed creaked again, dragging across the floor an inch at a time. Finally, unable to take it, he sat up. Lightning flashed, filling the room with white light. The bed had moved nearly a foot from the wall. Behind it was darkness, not the ordinary kind, but a black gap, too deep, too endless, as though the wall itself had opened. The thunder crashed, and when the light faded, he saw them. Pale hands, dozens of them, reaching out from the gap, curling over the bed frame. The boy screamed, but the storm swallowed his voice. The bed jerked forward violently, pulled toward the blackness. He clung to the headboard, tears streaming, his knuckles white. Then, just as suddenly, everything stopped. The bed was still. The gap was gone. His parents rushed in, lantern in hand, asking what had happened. But when they turned the light on the floor, their faces went pale. The wooden boards beneath the bed were gouged with claw marks. Fresh ones. And that night, even with the storm gone, the sound of dragging wood echoed from his room until morning. Cloud with rain bed ghost. The face at the window. The inn at the edge of town was nearly empty that stormy night. A traveler checked into a small upstairs room, grateful for shelter from the relentless rain. The wooden walls groaned against the wind, and the storm's howl filled the halls. Exhausted, he blew out the candle and lay in bed. Sleep almost claimed him when he heard it, tap, tap, tap. A sound at the window. At first, he ignored it, thinking it was the storm. But the tapping grew sharper, more deliberate. Uneasy, he sat up and peered through the shadows. The curtains swayed gently, though the window was shut tight. Lightning flared. And in that instant, he saw it. A face at the window. Pale, expressionless, pressed against the glass. Eyes dark and hollow, staring directly at him. He froze, heart hammering. The window was on the second floor. No ledge, no tree, nothing anyone could climb. When the thunder rolled, the light faded, and the face was gone. Breathing hard, he tried to convince himself it was imagination. But then came the sound. Scratch. 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 From the glass. He leapt forward, pulling the curtains shut, retreating. To his bed. Minutes passed. The storm raged. Then, softly, a whisper drifted through the room, "Let me in." The traveler clutched the blanket, whispering prayers, refusing to move. But as the candle flickered back to life on its own, his eyes went wide. The curtains were open again. And the face was no longer outside. Cloud with rain eye. The room that waited. On the outskirts of a forgotten village stood an inn no one stayed in anymore. Travelers passed it without a glance, but one stormy evening, a weary man stopped, desperate for rest. The innkeeper, an old woman with trembling hands, gave him a single key and whispered, "Don't open the door at the end of the hall." He nodded, though unease twisted in his stomach. His room was small but warm, with a bed and a single candle. The storm battered the shutters, yet inside, it was calm. Almost too calm. Hours passed. Sleep eluded him. Because down the hall, he heard it. Knock. 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 Soft at first, then sharper. Always 3 times. Always from the last door at the corridor's end. He covered his head with the blanket, willing himself not to listen. But then he noticed something. The knocks matched his heartbeat. When his chest pounded faster, so did the knocks. Finally, curiosity overcame fear. He rose, candle in hand, and crept down the creaking floorboards. The air grew colder. Shadows stretched unnaturally long. The door at the end loomed before him, its wood splintered and blackened. His hand shook as he reached for the knob. But before he touched it, the door creaked open on its own. Inside was darkness deeper than night. Then, slowly, a face leaned out. Not human. Not alive. Eyes hollow, mouth too wide, whispering his name. The candle blew out, plunging the hallway into blackness. By morning, the inn was empty. Only the old woman remained, and when travelers asked about the last guest, she only shook her head. The room was waiting. It always is, cloud with rain door ghost. The whispering attic. The storm that night was fierce, and the old house groaned under its weight. A family gathered downstairs by the fire, but the eldest daughter, curious by nature, kept glancing upward. For weeks, she had heard it, soft whispers from the attic whenever the rain fell. That night, she could bear it no longer. With a lantern in hand, she climbed the narrow staircase. The wooden steps creaked beneath her feet, and the higher she went, the colder the air became. The whispers grew clearer, though she still could not make out the words. At the attic door, she hesitated. The whispers stopped. Silence pressed in heavy and thick. With trembling fingers, she pushed it open. The lantern's glow revealed dust, cobwebs, and old trunks. Nothing more. She exhaled shakily, almost laughing at her nerves. But then, whisper, 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 right behind her ear. She spun around. Empty air. Her lantern flickered, shadows twisting across the rafters. And then she saw them, faces, dozens of them, half-formed in the wooden beams. Eyes and mouths, etched deep into the grain, all moving, all whispering in unison. Her heart raced. She stumbled back, but the floorboards shifted beneath her feet as if alive, pushing her toward the farthest corner. There, in the darkness, sat a small wooden chair. And upon it, a figure. Child-sized. Perfectly still. Its head bowed low, yet its lips moved, whispering endlessly. When lightning flashed through the cracks in the roof, she finally saw its face. It was hers. The lantern shattered to the floor, and the whispers rose into a scream that shook the house. Cloud with rain candle ghost. The man in the corner. The boarding house was old, its wallpaper peeling, its wooden floors sagging with age. A young woman rented a small room on the third floor, grateful for the cheap price. The landlady gave only one warning as she handed over the key: don't stare too long into the dark corners at night. The woman laughed it off, until the first stormy evening. The rain beat hard against the glass, and her candlelight threw weak shadows across the room. At first, she felt comforted, wrapped in a blanket with a book. But as the night deepened, she noticed it, something darker than shadow pooling in the farthest corner. At first, it looked like nothing. Just gloom. But the longer she looked, the more it seemed to take shape. A tall, thin outline, standing perfectly still. Her heart quickened. She blinked, rubbed her eyes. Still there. Watching. She forced herself to lie down, pulling the blanket over her head. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by the sense of being observed. When thunder roared, she jolted awake. Her candle had gone out. And in the lightning's flash, she saw him. The man was real now. Standing in the corner, his face obscured by shadow, but his eyes glinting faintly. His long arms hung unnaturally low, fingers brushing the floor. She tried to scream, but her throat was locked. The next flash of lightning, he was closer. The next, closer still. Until the storms. Silence revealed him standing right at her bedside, bent low, whispering, "Now you see me." By morning, the room was empty. The blanket was crumpled on the floor. And in the darkest corner, the wallpaper was torn away, revealing the shape of two hands pressed deep into the wall. Cloud with rain candle bust in silhouette. The last call. The rain fell in relentless sheets, and the power lines outside swayed dangerously in the wind. A man sat alone in his living room, a single lantern glowing faintly beside him. The storm had cut the electricity hours ago, leaving the house in silence, except for the phone. It rang. Startled, he stared at it. The landline had been dead for years, disconnected and unused, yet the old rotary phone on the wall now buzzed loudly in the darkness. Hesitant, he lifted the receiver. Hello? At first, only static. Then a voice, his own. Don't go upstairs. The line went dead. His skin prickled cold. He hadn't been planning to go upstairs, but now the thought of the empty second floor gnawed at him. Slowly, lantern in hand, he climbed the steps. Halfway up, the phone rang again. He rushed back down, breath shaking, and answered. This time, the voice was not his. It was a woman's, hoarse and broken. He's already there. The lantern flickered. He turned, staring at the staircase. Something moved at the top. A tall figure, crouched low, its limbs bending wrong, slowly descending. He dropped the phone, heart pounding, scrambling toward the door. But the phone rang again, shrill, demanding. Against his will, he looked back. The receiver swayed on its cord, and through the static, a whisper seeped into the room. Too late. When the storm passed the next morning, the house was quiet again. The phone was still off the hook. And on the wall beside it, written in wet handprints, was a single message, answer me, cloud with rain telephone receiver ghost.